Everybody thinks that the West was won, but in reality, who won the West? Because in order for something to be won, somebody had to lose, and somebody had to win. So who exactly won the West, and who lost the West? Because from my historical understanding, we tend to think, as American citizens today, that we won the West. But I'm here to tell you that that simply isn't the case. Because if you believe in the Old West, and you don't agree with the New West and all that it stands for, then you have to understand that it isn't really a question of winning or losing. Nobody's won and nobody's lost yet, because there's an active battle going on. But first we need to dive back into history to understand the winners and the losers. And this isn't going to be all-encompassing. That's not possible. This is merely snapshots in time of major winners and major losers. So first up, we have to start with the Spanish. The Spanish showed up in a world that had already relatively been conquered. The world that they showed up to is called the New World. And when they showed up, there were Native Americans who had already established power structures. And when they showed up, they immediately started breaking apart those power structures in order to advance the Catholic Church or the gospel in their eyes. And they did so mainly by bringing people into missions. And those people, the Native Americans, assimilated into Catholic Mexican culture. And therefore, the first loser of the West, they lost their lands, they lost their privileges, they lost their power structures, were the Native Americans that the Spanish interacted with. The next group of people are the Spanish themselves. The Spanish themselves lost California, they lost a lot of Texas, Arizona, New Mexico. They lost those to the United States of America. In fact, the United States bought them. However, they bought them cheaply, and I guarantee you that Mexico really didn't want to give those up. They had to because the Americans wanted them to. So the next winner is the United States. The next loser is the Mexican government. Then there's the Native Americans in states like Wyoming, Montana, and Idaho, and parts of Utah. They were granted a bunch of different reservations to live on, but through the years the United States backed out on treaties and took those reservations from the Native Americans and forced them onto more or less crappy land. So therefore the next loser in this situation are the Native Americans that are part of that sort of Northwest territory. The winner in that case was once again the US government. But when we break this down on a micro level, we're looking at the actual people involved. It's much more than just Spanish and Native American, or US versus Mexico, or US versus Native Americans up north. It's more about individual groups and their interests and what the West stands for. Now, I've broken down what the Old West stands for in other videos, but more or less, it stands for integrity, stands for horsemanship, cattle, riding around and being free, stands for the drifter, the cowboy, the puncher. That's a whole era, that's a whole people group. And those are the people that are currently battling for the West today. So, when we break down the individual people groups that won or lost, it really comes back to this era, the era of the cowboy, because the Spanish invented cowboying. They invented the position of vaquero, the cowboy, the one who rides horses and focuses on handling livestock. They invented that career, that position, that lifestyle, that livelihood. They invented that. And ever since the Spanish made it to the New World, that has been a staple of the American West. And the American West in the American people's eyes is a lot of Lone Ranger cowboy types. That Lone Ranger is gone. The drifter is gone. That's another loser. That's just another piece of modernity that's come in and taken from the Old West. Then you have obviously the vaquero, the cowboy. Like I said, these are the guys who are fighting currently for the West, the rancher. These are the guys who are out there on horseback, moving their cattle, trying to make a living when property taxes keep going up. Those are the guys that are hanging on by a thread. And every day that those guys make it, without selling out, without moving to town and becoming a banker, is another day that the Old West survives. I want to look specifically at when the Old West came under attack from the New West. And for me, that really begins when these people called nesters started moving to the Old West. And a nester is somebody who isn't a cowboy, they're not a rancher. They came out west with the promise of being able to homestead, with the promise of being able to divide up the land, to civilize it. This goes back to the frontier thesis. The frontier thesis is that Western civilization, so the Eastern Americas, coming over to the Western America, Old West, and they're going to civilize it. They're going to bring their banks, their roads, their women, how they do business. They're bringing that to the West. And before they showed up, it was honestly just ranchers. That's the Old West, and that's still here today. People still do those things, and that's why I say the Old West is still around and it's still fighting. But every single tax, every single subdivision of land, every time somebody puts on a cowboy hat and pretends to be a cowboy when they're not, when they don't have the Old West's interest in mind, is tearing another hole into the Old West defense. Now, should the Old West still survive? Because let's be honest, guys, there's probably a lot better usage of the land rather than just having cattle out there, right? The answer is no, because we as Americans and as people, we need to understand that we want that heritage. We want that tradition to hang on. We want to hang on to that, because if we don't, then we're just going to be like every other country out there. When somebody thinks of America, they think of the American cowboy. And we want that to remain. We want cowboys out there moving cattle. We want big land interest in America. We don't want everything subdivided. Sure, it's nice to have national parks and national forest, right? Well, that's a part of the puzzle. If you go after the mega ranchers, you're also going after national parks and national forests. And that's a really big problem. Therefore, I propose that if you are a proponent for the Old West and you agree with things like integrity, the cowboys, and working hard, if you agree with those things, then I believe you should do everything in your power to make sure that ranchers can stay on the land, to make sure that land doesn't get subdivided and that everything doesn't turn into big old cities. Because once everything turns into a big city, we've got nothing left. We're all going to have to start dressing like hipsters, wearing skinny jeans. We're all going to have to submit to authority at every turn. We're going to have to give up our guns, our rights, everything. It really is a rights issue, especially in the Old West. And the reason why I brought up the winners and the losers of the West is because there is a track record of winners taking away from the losers everything that they held dear. And I don't want that to happen to the Old West. It was fought for, it was handled, and now we're attacking it again. And one of the major things that we need to hang on to is we need to hang on to our horsemanship and our cattle and big plots of land. Because once one of those things go, it's all downhill. And it's already starting. People are riding four-wheelers instead of riding horses. People are transitioning away from cattle to selling up their land. People are moving away from the big plots because they can't afford it due to property taxes. And luckily, though, there's a growing movement of people that are banding together, who are sticking together, who are hanging on to tradition, who are telling the world, no, we want the Old West to stay. We like the traditions. We like our freedom. We stand with integrity. We're not here to go. We're not running, because these colors don't run. And the Old West is going to hang on to the bitter end. And I know that one day it will die. Make sure you're fighting for the Old West, people. If you like this video, subscribe for more. I'm Breven Engelson. Adios.